Hello people, welcome to our workshop on configuring your app and data for continuous delivery with Netlify. I'm Tibbs, I'm your presenter, and just below me you can see Sebi, who's going to be handling our chat for us.
Hello everyone, welcome everyone. So if you have any questions, please use the chat, don't be shy. I will be more than happy to help you. Hey, Tibbs, stage is yours.
And Sebi will put up useful links in the chat as we go that you can follow if that's helpful. Right, we'll wait a moment in case other people want to join. It's always sensible. So if you're on the chat, if you want to say where you're from or what's your history with continuous delivery, continuous deployment, do you know what they are? Have you used them? When did you first come across them? Then please feel free to say in the chat. I'm old enough that I've come date from the days when we would create a piece of software and hand it over to the testing department, who would then spend a week or two testing it and come back later and say if it works or not. And unfortunately, in at least one case, a number of them got fired because they didn't find bugs often enough, which seemed to me a bit counterintuitive. They weren't finding bugs, it didn't mean they weren't doing their job. And then later on, gradually over the years, the idea that your testing environment should be run by continuous delivery has become, I think, accepted. It still seems to me quite often unusual in companies to actually have automated deployment to production, though, which is, I think, an ambition many companies have. And with that, let's get started. Wait a minute, make sure my cursor is pointing at the right screen. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to go through what continuous delivery and continuous deployment actually are. It's a bit unfortunate that they're both abbreviated CD. One might wish that was different. We'll have an introduction to the tools we're going to use, to Netlify and to Aiven. We'll create some data services to back our application, and then we'll configure our application's deployment and show how Netlify can manage that for us. We'll make a change to the application and see the change deployed automatically. And then towards the end, we'll take it to the next level and look at a bit more interesting things you can do as well. And then at the end, we'll have a recap, which should look suspiciously like this agenda. It should talk about having done all of these things. So what are continuous delivery and continuous deployment? So continuous delivery comes from the idea that essentially we want to be able to reproduce all the steps used in different environments so that we don't have, it works on my machine, but when I actually run it in production, production is a different environment, it doesn't run there. So the idea is that we have a development environment, we have testing, we have pipelines that make all the stages happen one by one, and those pipelines should be similar for deploying to production, deploying to test, deploying to in-house stress testing systems, so that the actual environments in which things are run are very similar. That means that if we find a bug in our testing, we can be sure that it's the same sort of bug that will happen in production. And so traditionally we would have development, then there'd be a testing phase, there'd be an OK lever, and someone pulls the lever to say OK, and then when that's OK, it goes to production. And that OK is a manual step. Continuous deployment is very similar. It's got exactly the same steps, but when tests are passed, then the software is automatically deployed to production. So the only difference is whether that manual OK switch is there or not. So continuous delivery has a manual step to say, are we OK to proceed? Continuous deployment does not. And very often companies are keen on the idea that we should have continuous deployment to production. It's quite normal to have continuous deployment to your test environments. Jez Humble and David Farley published a book in 2010, which is still very relevant, introducing all of these concepts, explaining why you might want to do this, and so on. My boss, Matty, swears by this and says it's still a very relevant book. Indeed, I'm meant to be having a copy arriving in the post today, so you can see I'm convinced of this because I read the first couple of chapters on Kindle on Amazon, and it's beautifully written and very to the point still. So the link to the website where you can find that is in the chat. So let's have a look at our example application, the thing we're going to be playing with. This is, I'll go to the home page of it. This is an application that some of my colleagues at Aiven have written. It's actually an application to demonstrate in part deploying to Netlify, but also why Redis is a useful cache. And if we go to the recipes page, we can see that it's got some information about caching at the top, which you can switch on and off to show whether Redis is actually making an impact. And further down, it's got a list of recipes. I can like them and unlike them. That happens live. I can go and look at a recipe, and there's the recipe there, information about how to make all the information you'd normally have for a recipe. This is not the version of the application we're going to be playing with later. This is a separate deployment of the application that we're not going to come back to and touch at all. So we're not going to be touching this one. This is running separately. It's one we prepared earlier. So let's go back to our slides. So how is that normally produced, worked with, managed? So traditionally, what one would do is work on your local host, on your local environment. You'd use your database and so on. This diagram shows using MySQL and Redis. We're actually using Postgres and Redis in our work today, but it's much the same idea. So one would be running the databases either in containers locally, or I just tend to run Postgres and Redis just by running them as servers on my machine. The source code would be on my machine, in this case Alex's machine, and one would serve the application on localhost 8080, and that's all very well and fine for a development environment. Alex, our developer in this case, would push the code to GitHub, and if we've got automatic deployment, perhaps by Netlify, this would trigger building that same application in the Netlify, in this case free tier. Doing that means that we get a secure, scalable, and reliable setup in the cloud that should be sufficiently like our actual production environment. And indeed, one can use Netlify to trigger to for the production environment itself. And that app would be running in the cloud and would be talking to databases over a secure connection, also running in the cloud. And as I said, in our case, we'll be using Postgres and Redis. So we're running the application using Netlify. Netlify facilitates the combination of a decoupled web stack in a single workflow. Basically, it does all the difficult stuff for you of getting the deployment working. Even if you're not using Netlify to send stuff to production, it can be very worth using it for your testing environments and for your PR review environments. Now, note there are other tools available for this purpose. It's just we happen to know Netlify and be talking about it in this presentation. For the data, we want to store our data somewhere in the cloud. I could have it on my laptop and expose it to the world. That wouldn't be a very good idea at all, especially if I switch my laptop off. So since I work for Aiven, the natural solution for me is to use the services that are available through Aiven itself. And Aiven is the trusted open source data platform for everybody. What we do is we provide the various different database and streaming technologies you can see along the top there, including Postgres and Redis. We make them available to you at predictable prices across multiple clouds, and we do all of the management, the backup, the upgrades and so on for you that you'd otherwise have to do yourself. Obviously, I'm a convert to Aiven, and I think it's a wonderful idea. It does mean that a workshop list can be set up quite quickly. Aiven has both a free tier. You can get free instances of Postgres, MySQL, and Redis, which you don't pay anything for, and we intend to keep those going forever. We also have the ability to get a 30-day trial. We're not going to use that today, but that means that you get 30 days of any of the services to play with, to work with, to test before you decide if you actually want to use us as a customer. So in order to do the workshop today, and I do recommend following along and playing at home if you can, you need to have a GitHub account. These prerequisites are listed on the forum page at that link, which I'm sure Sebi is already, he's put in the chat already. Thank you, Sebi. You'll need to have a GitHub account already set up. You need Git installed and ready to run in the terminal. You'll need to have an Aiven account. We'll go through setting that up in a moment. You should have the Netlify command installed. And if you haven't already got it installed, the instructions to do that are also on the forum page. And you should already have forked the GitHub repository there, Next.js, no Netlify, and cloned it locally to work on. I'm not going to show doing that. I've already done that myself. So first of all, we're going to go and create our Aiven services because they can take a few moments to run up. So if you follow this link, then that will take you to the Aiven sign up page. And you can sign up with Google, Microsoft, GitHub. I'm going to use email because I want to make an account that is not the same as any of my normal accounts. I just want an account for this demo. So if I continue with email, it wants to have my name, and I'm going to tell it I'm Tibbs for the 10th of January. It wants an email. If I can spell. Please don't use my email. It wants a password. I'm just going to copy a password from my password generator. I'm not using the password that you can see as suggested there. And it wants me to, that's actually not the password I want. So I apologize. That's cut and paste from somewhere else, which is not helpful. Let's cut and paste from that. That's much better. That's still not the password you saw earlier. And I should, in a moment, get an email, which you won't see me receive. And that's arrived. And it wants me to click on a link to activate my account. And here we are. So here's the Aiven console. It's asking me some questions. I'm going to say I want to use it for personal purposes. What you answer is up to you. I'm going to go with that rather strange name. We can give it a project name that's a bit more useful. You can change that later on. It wasn't in my country, and if you're in, for instance, the United States, it will ask you also for a state. You can, if you wish, subscribe to our newsletter. I would obviously recommend that, but it's optional, and we obviously choose not to subscribe you automatically because that's the friendly way to do it. So if I click done there, then I am now ready to create services. So we come back to this page, which is the current. So first of all, I'm going to create a Postgres service. Now, I want to use our free plan, so I click on free plan. And as you can see at the right, that tells me it's going to cost me nothing. I want North America, and I want the DONYC region because the Netlify free plan is running in the New York area, and that will give us less network latency for talking between Netlify and the database. It's already pre-selected the only free plan there is for me. You don't get as much stuff with a free plan, but you will get it for the foreseeable future. We're not expecting to stop our free plans at any point. We hope they'll carry on forever. We don't necessarily guarantee they'll continue on the same service. At the moment, we're on DigitalOcean, but if we do move anything, we'll migrate it for you. Now, it's always sensible to give a sensible name to this. So I'm going to call this PG Netlify. It's not very sensible. In real life, I'd perhaps put some more effort into naming that. And let's create the service. At this point, it comes up with a wizard that I can follow through to do various things. But I'm just going to go over to the left here and go to Service Overview because I don't want to do any of those things. And we can now see we're back at a page that gives you all the details about this service. And at the very top, we can see that it's rebuilding one node. And that will take a little while. If we go back to the project at the left here, I can create another service at the top right, create service. And now I'm going to create my Redis service. Again, I want the free plan. Again, it's going to cost me nothing. It's remembered which region I used, which is convenient. It's got the free plan chosen. Again, it's good to give it a useful name so you can tell what service it is. And let's create that. And in the same way, I don't want to do the wizard, so I'm going to select Go to Service Overview at the left here. And again, we can see the service page. If we go back to project, we can see we've now got 2 services which are busy building themselves. They're in blue. They'll go to green. Those little circles will go to green when the services are finished building. Just a second while I check my crib sheet to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Right, so now we've got our services set up and running. Let's get Netlify set up because we're going to need Netlify. So if we go to app.netlify.com, we need to log in. I'm going to log in with GitHub. I'm already logged into GitHub. So if I click this, this should take me straight through. I'm crossing my fingers here. You can't see it. If you aren't logged into GitHub, it will prompt you to go to GitHub and log in. And we get the normal questions about why are we doing things. I'm going to say it's a personal thing, and I'm creating a web app, and I'm an other. I'm not going to bother to give a project name. It'll generate one for me, so I can continue to deploy. I don't want to choose any more things here because we're going to set this up later on by ourselves. So I'm going to choose skip this step for now. And you can see it's created a team called Tibbs at Work, which is my GitHub user ID. So this is the homepage for Netlify. We haven't associated any GitHub repositories with this yet, so it's not doing anything yet. So now this is me on Gitpod. Gitpod is a very nice web application that lets you have an IDE, or in my case, I've got a terminal, and I've already linked it to the clone of my repository. So we can see here that I'm inside the Next.js no Netlify directory that I've got cloned, and here's the actual source code for the repository. It's a JavaScript application, a Node.js application. It's using Prisma as the ORM to talk the databases. An ORM is an object relational mapper. That helps with the fact that relational databases use SQL. They're very much in the relational paradigms. You've got joins and things like that. Object-oriented languages like JavaScript don't think like that. They have objects, and there's not necessarily a one-to-one mapping between objects and tables. An ORM, like Prisma, gives you all the tools you need to make it easy to talk to a relational database using terminology that makes sense from the programming language's point of view. And if we look at, I apologize, if we look at Prisma schema, we can see that we are saying that we're talking to a database we're talking to Postgres, and we're using an environment variable database URL to figure out which database we're talking to. We use a URL, an environment variable, because we don't want to embed the actual location of the database, the password, the actual host, and so on, into our source code. If we do that, then that means other people can come to GitHub and find out our passwords, which is a bad idea. Also, it means we can change which database we're pointing to just by changing the environment variable. So the idea is that you use the environment variable at the last possible moment when you're deploying, rather than embedding it into your source code. And we can see here that we're defining the schema that will be used for the relational database. So we've got recipe name, cooking time, servings, and so on. Right, and if the next thing is we look at packages.json, package.json. So this is a JavaScript and a Node application, so we can use npm to do things. And this file, I apologize, I meant to do vim, not less. Don't get the nice syntax highlighting. So one of the things the package.json defines is it defines various scripts. These are the things that npm run will be able to run. And the one we're interested in this one, build deploy. The build deploy command will do Prisma generate, which sets up Prisma. It'll do the build. It'll do a migration of the database if necessary. It'll set up the database and with a seed, so it'll put data into the database for us. And all of those are useful things to do. That's the command we're going to be interested. So remember, build, deploy. Now, we need to connect this setup to Netlify. So to do that, we need to Netlify login. Now I'm going to check first that I've actually got the Netlify command set up. So Netlify version should tell me what version of Netlify I'm using. And that's good. It's running. We have the Netlify CLI. If you haven't got it set up, you can go to the forum page that was mentioned earlier, and that has instructions on how to set it up with npm. So let's do a Netlify login. This tells Netlify who I am. And in a moment, here we are. And it says authorize. I'm happy to authorize this. And that says I can now close this window and return to the terminal. So let's do that. Now finally, I'll do Netlify status. I love status commands. They're a thing to type just to make sure you're doing what you think you're doing. Then in a moment, this will tell us that, yes, I'm logged in as Tony Ibs at Aiven.io, which is my normal email address that I use for GitHub. And it says I haven't yet set up this folder to be linked to a site or anything. That's the next thing we're going to do. We're not actually going to run Netlify link because that's relatively manual. We're going to run Netlify init because that's a wizard that will ask us questions. Now, I always forget, let's actually clear the screen so we're back at the top and you can see what I'm doing a bit better. So let's run Netlify init. It takes a moment to connect to the world. Now, the options are to connect to an existing Netlify site, which we don't have. So we want to create and configure a new site. So I've just used down arrow to choose that and hit return to choose that option. Now I'm happy with that team, so I can hit return. I don't care what the site name is. It'll make me one up, and I'm happy to go with that. If I cared, I could change it later. So it's created this site. And it's given it the name Jocular Ginger Snap and then some numbers. That's fair enough. Now, it then wants me to authorize with GitHub because Netlify is going to need to talk to GitHub on my behalf. Normally, authorize with GitHub through app.netlify.com would be the best solution. Because I'm using Gitpod as my editing environment, that actually doesn't allow me to do the correct network connection. So here, I'm going to use authorize with the GitHub personal access token. You're probably better off using app.netlify.com. Do note that if you do use the personal access token, it needs to be a classic token because the more modern restricted tokens don't have the right fields in them. Now, as soon as I hit return on that, it's going to ask me for a password of the personal access token. I don't particularly want you to see my personal access token, so I'm going to give you a picture of me on holiday in Seattle while I take this off somewhere else so you can't see it anymore and find my password manager and get the personal access token. And of course, inevitably, the password manager has closed its window, so this will take me a moment. Here we go. I'm just finding my access token. And behind the scenes, I'm just putting that in. And I can now bring this back in again. So I've now put in the access token where you couldn't see. I very much hope you couldn't see. It's now asking us what build command we want to run. Now, if you remember, it isn't npm run build, it's npm run build-deploy. So let's select that. The .next directory is the standard directory to deploy to. We're happy with that. And we would like it to create a netlify.toml for us. That's the file that actually has the Netlify information in it. So there we go. So if we have a look inside the netlify.toml, we can see that it's actually relatively simple. Tells us what the command is, and it has some other boilerplate. There's then various comments we can uncomment if we wanted to do other things which aren't relevant today. But if we do git status, we can see that we haven't told Git about this yet. Git doesn't yet know about this, which means that it's not, in particular, this means it's not actually available on the far end repository. So let's do Git. Let's bring ourselves to the top again. So let's git add netlify.toml. That tells Git, hello, this is a file you're actually maybe going to be managing. And we actually want to put this into the this version of that file into Git's current memory, into Git's current idea of what the world is. So we're going to add this and give it a commit message. So git commit says commit this file to Git. The -m is a short form of giving a message. So we're saying add Netlify configuration. Just not perhaps the best message, but it's decent. So now if we do git status, we can see that, but we haven't yet pushed this upstream to the repository on GitHub. And that's what we want to do next. Second. And in order to do that, we just do git push. Now, those of you paying close attention will notice that my prompt is showing gitpod, which is fair enough. That's where I am. It's showing my local working directory. And then it's showing what Git branch I'm on. And you'll notice that we're on main. I don't normally recommend working on main. I normally recommend working on a branch and then merging the branch back. In this particular instance, because I'm doing a workshop, a demo, yeah, I can get away with it. And arguably, because this is a single person project, yeah, maybe it's okay. I still prefer to work on a branch in general. Because I'm just setting up Netlify, yes, that's more or less okay. Now, if we use Netlify open, that will take us in just a second. Netlify's been slow today. Don't want to block a pop-up. Let's try it again. That takes us back to our Netlify. So that's a convenient way of going from the command line if you don't remember your Netlify website. So this is showing us the data of a jocular ginger snap. And we can see it says site deploy failed. So if I click on that, that will show us here. And if we look at the logs, oh, it's all right. I am not very good at looking around. Here we are, if we want to look down here. So let's look and see why it failed. Building it failed. And when we scroll down, I hate this red text at the right here. We can see that the reason it's failed is, well, look, we hadn't defined our database URL yet. So we haven't got our environment variable set up to tell the application where to find the database. Yeah, fair enough. We hadn't actually done that yet. So let's close that window and go back to our thing here. So we need to set up the environment variables for the Postgres and the Redis. Now, if you remember back at our Aiven service, we go to our Postgres service. So here, I said we had all of the information we needed on this page about our service. There's more information further down. But in particular, this service URI here is the information we need to put in that environment variable. So I'm copying that to the clipboard with the little copy icon on the right. If I come back to here, I can do netlify env:set, and then I want database URL, and then that value, and I put it in quotes because it's likely to have strange characters in it, in particular sort of question mark in it. Now, you can all see my password for that database. Please don't use it. But actually, that database is not going to be there after the end of this workshop. So I don't think it's a very big security risk. So that sets that and confirms it's done it. We're also going to need to do the same for Redis. So back to project, choose the Redis, and copy its service URI, and go back to the thing and Netlify set. And I believe that this one is, Redis URI for some reason. I don't know why one is URL and the other's URI. Again, puts the value in single quotes. The Redis with 2 S's is correct. It's for historical reasons. So that sets that. We can then do Netlify :list to see what values we've set, which is always nice. Now, by default, it won't show the values. If I say yes here, it will show us the actual values. Obviously, the default is the safer option is just showing the values were set. Now, if we go back to our web application and go to our site and go to site configuration here at the left, we can see here we can choose environment variables, and we can see that those environment variables are indeed set upstream in Redis. And if we come here, we can actually look, and there are the environment variables that we've set. It's using the same environment variable for all of those purposes. So let's go back to here. Now, because we have changed the environment variables, but we haven't changed any files, Netlify doesn't know to rebuild the application. So we actually want to rebuild. Whoops, that's what I meant to do. We actually need to rebuild the application. So I always have problems remembering how to do this.
Hey, Tiff, just one.
Yeah.
We have someone in the chat. He has trouble getting the Netlify URL. He's getting Netlify command not found using Ubuntu WSL. Maybe. So Warwick, did you do the npm install Netlify CLI -G? I don't know if
you need to have npm installed.
Yeah.
And the command should be the one in the forum. Yeah.
Yeah. The one I put now on the screen there.
npm. Good. Yeah.
That one. Okay. I can paste it again. But yeah, continue. I handled that in the chat, but it was just
okay. Cool.
Maybe,
yeah. Right. Hopefully you can catch up again. Yes, this is the problem with lots of different commands that might be installed in different ways on different platforms. I guess the good thing about npm is that at least it's relatively platform neutral. Cool. As you can see, that worked. Right. So if we go back to, I always have problems with the Netlify UI. I'm going to blame me, not Netlify. But I can retry here. So let's retry with the latest branch commit as the head of the thing. So this is going to try and build again. We can see it going here. Whilst that's happening, I'm going to go and do something that's useful for later on in our play. So this may take me one moment while I just do a couple of things. You can have to go watch what's going on there. Apologies for the silence here. I'm just doing a thing. Okay, that's done. That will be useful later on. So let's see what's happening with our deployment. It's still building. Let's go and see the logs. Hopefully this will actually build successfully because it now has the environment variables, assuming I've set them up correctly. I'm afraid I have no experience with Ubuntu, particularly on WSL. So this is now succeeded in building. It's now deploying the site. So now it's deployed the site. I can open it. And here we have our very own copy of the recipes database. If we go here to the actual data, you can see this is a fresh copy of the database. There are no likes yet. I'm going to like, oh, I don't know, what am I going to like? I'm going to like butternut squash soup with persimmon. I'm not sure I'd like that, but that's just to prove that we can do this. And it's always worth liking the fruitcake. If you're an American, fruitcake in the UK is a nice, soft, squishy, dense thing with a lot of flavor. I understand in the US that's a bit different. It appears that Warwick is still having problems with setting things up. I don't know if this doesn't work, then we're obviously going to have to investigate offline later to see what the problem might have been. But I think it's a very bit limited what we can do today. So we have successfully deployed our application to production from main. That's all well and good. Of course, the point about this is what happens if we make a change to our application. Thanks, Warwick. And this will be, the video will be available on YouTube afterwards, so you can always come back and follow. And if you have questions, you can ask them on the forum, and we'll hopefully be able to answer those later on. So if we're going to work for an actual change, I want to do it in a branch. There are various ways of creating a new branch and checking it out in GitHub, in Git. I'm using GitHub git checkout -b. That's the -b means create a new branch, and the checkout means then check out to it. And I'm going to call that branch wonderful for reasons that will become obvious in a moment. Now, if we go back to our application, which is there, all I want to do is I'm going to change this header line so that the word recipes becomes wonderful recipes, because it's a very small change that will be obvious. So let's go back to our here. So we want to, I just need to look up which file I want to edit. So I'm to edit src/components, navbar, oops, and navbar.tsx. Now, this is a very nice format of laying out the actual components of a website, but it is indentation sensitive. So I have to make very sure that I don't change the indentation, because the linter will get very unhappy with me and won't let the thing build. So all I'm doing is at line 22, I'm putting in wonderful at the beginning. So we're now talking about wonderful recipes. And if we go again, do a git status, which is always a good thing to do. It tells us that we've modified that one file, but we haven't told Git about it yet. We haven't told Git about the change. So let's git add. And then we need to commit it so that Git thinks this is the version that we want to use. Please give better commit messages than I'm doing today. If I didn't give the -m, if I just did git commit, it would throw me into my default editor and would allow me to put a better check-in message, but this will do for now. Now, again, we then want to push, but we need to push to the origin, to the remote repository, to GitHub, and we need to push this branch wonderful, because that doesn't yet exist at the far end. So I can push this branch wonderful to the origin, to the remote repository. And that says, usefully, that if I want to create a pull request, I can use this URL here to create a pull request. So let's do that. This is just asking me to log in. Right, so that wonderful is not a very good title for this PR. We should normally follow all the instructions here and do a very nice commit message, but all I'm going to do is do something short and simple. Now, if we look down to see what we've changed, oh, we can see our change navbar.tsx, but it's also saying we've changed the netlify.toml, which we know isn't true. And the reason for that, if we look at the top here, it's saying that we're wanting to merge tibs at work, Next.js, no Netlify. That's good. The branch, wonderful. That's good. But it's wanting to merge it into main of the original repository that I forked from. And that's the default behavior for creating a pull request. You normally are wanting to merge back into the actual original repository. We don't want to in this case. We want to merge back into this fork of the repository. So I choose this particular version of the repository. And now we're merging the wonderful branch into the main branch on the same repository. If we go down and look, we just have the change we've made. We don't have any extra changes. So we can now create the pull request. And in a moment, and sometimes this takes a moment, sometimes this is immediate, it will tell us that it's talking to Netlify. Let me just refresh that. My network has been being slow today. That's my excuse. If we come back over here, that hasn't come up yet. Okay, this is being slow today. Some days this is quicker. Yesterday when I practiced this, it was instant. There we go. So here we can see it's saying some checks haven't completed yet, and it's pending on Netlify creating this deploy preview for us. If we say details and open that in a new tab, then here we can see we're back at the build page where it's building a deployment for this branch for that PR. Going back to our thing, normally you'd have other checks here. I'd have unit tests running as well, and so on, which would also gate the PR being merged, so I wouldn't be able to merge if the unit tests weren't passed. This is gated on whether the deployment succeeds. Why would I do that? So the advantage of having Netlify build in this instance is that obviously if someone's reviewing my PR, they'll look at the code, they'll see what are the changes. The changes seem reasonable, but they probably also want to actually run them up and test them. And so having a deployment produced means that they can actually go to that web page as it's live and try it out. And in this instance, that's particularly useful using Netlify because we have data associated with that deployment. So we need to deploy the data as well, and Netlify is taking care of that. This now says that all checks have passed. So if I go back here to my deploy summary, I can open my deploy preview. And here we are. We can see at the top here, we have wonderful recipes. And if I click on that, here are our wonderful recipes. And it's the same database as before. We can see we've got unlike and unlike as before. But wait a minute. Those are the same values we set in our production database. And this is the database we're using for our PR, for our possible change. So if I do a like here, I've also done it to the production database. And that's a bad idea. So this is as far as we're going with things you can follow along with today. But the next thing I want to show you is how to mend that. because we want to use a different database, a different set of databases for testing, for PRs, than we do for our production database. Now, to do that, we can actually go back to Netlify. We can just set, and if we go back to site configuration and environment variables, then if we choose, for instance, the database URL, we can see we have different deployment contexts. Now, at the moment, we've got the same database, the same environment variable for all of these, but we can choose to have a different environment variable for production than we do for deploy previews, branch deploys, and so on. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to set it up so that production is using a different database than all of the others, because production is the one we want to be careful. Now, when I disappeared earlier and say I was being slow, what I was actually doing was setting up another couple of services. So if we go back to our project here, earlier on I set up the Redis Netlify and the PG Netlify. I've now set up Redis Prod and PG Prod. These are both on the hobbyist plan. They're using our free trial. So these are on the 30 days free trial. We're only allowed one of each service on the free plan. And indeed, you shouldn't be using the free plan for production. Really use a paid service, or in this case, a trial service for production. The free plan is not intended to be that supported or that reliable. It's therefore for trying things out. Hobbyist is not something I would normally use for production either, but in this instance, it's our smallest plan and it will work perfectly well. So in the same way as before, this time I'm going to set the environment variables in the Netlify app because it's easier. We can go to our PG prod. We can copy the URI. And if we go back to the environment variables over here, we can choose to edit them. We want a different value for each deploy context. Now, it will by default use the value that was already there. If I delete this one, I can copy in, please ignore my password manager. I can copy in the new thing. And if I scroll right here, we can see it's got PG prod in there. So that's correct. And I can save that. And then I can do the same for Redis. Go back to my service, back to my project, select Redis prod, copy the information for that, go back to this window. I want a different value for each deployment context again. And again, I want to change the production value, so paste that in. Just have a quick look to check that it's got the right service in there. And there is Redis prod, so that's good. Save the variable. Now again, as before, I've only changed environment variables. I haven't changed any files, so Netlify is not going to rebuild for me without me asking it to. Now, I've changed the environment variables for production, so it's production I want to rebuild. So if we go to, I apologize for this. So production, this was rebuilding this. So if we go here, we can then choose options, retry with latest branch commit on production. So it's on main. And this should rebuild. And here we are. So this is building that. This will take a moment. So this is a very important idea, that we need to be able to keep our production environment, the actual data, separate from our testing data. We might need more than one sort of testing data. And it's very useful. It's kind of important and necessary that any deployment mechanism you have can support this. This will take a little while to build. Here we go. Now, whilst it's doing that, something else to think about. If you remember, when I showed you the package.json, we can see that in the build deploy, the last thing it's doing is prisma.db seed. And what seed does is to say, I'll put data in your database for you. Now that's good when I create the database from scratch. But if I'm deploying to production, I don't want to recreate the data in the database every time because I'd overwrite whatever data was already there. We worried about this when we were first doing this workshop, but actually, as it turns out, if we look in the Prisma directory at the seed.ts, which is the command, the code for the command, the seed command, we can see down in the main, I'll just bring that up a bit here. We can see down in the main function here, let's bring that a little bit further up, that it actually finds out how many recipes there are already in the database. And it's only if there are not no recipes, then it will just return immediately. So as if there are recipes in the database already, it won't reseed it, which is exactly the behavior we want. So that tells us that if we do a seed at a database that's already got data in it, it will do nothing, which is reassuring and a worthwhile check to make. Going back to our deployment, that appears to have finished. So we can open our production deployment. So we're back to seeing recipes because this is production. And all of our likes have gone away here. So we can like things. Let's like several different things at the beginning. And over here, this is our wonderful recipes, as you can see at the top. So let's just refresh this just to make it quite clear what we're doing. And we can see it's only got the likes that we had in our branch, in our original database. So this is the original database, which is now only being used for our PRs and other things. If we go back to our production database, the likes are different. These are now independent. And that means that our job is done and we are happy. So, what did we learn today? Well, we learned about deploying an application securely and at scale and why this was an important thing to do. We learned about creating Aiven for PostgreSQL and Aiven for Redis services because Aiven is a wonderful, robust data backend. We learned about deploying an application using Netlify because Netlify is a good example of how to do this continuous deployment kind of job. And we learned that it's a good idea not to test with live production data because that will definitely lead to bad things happening. I hope that was useful. If it was, or even if it wasn't, please give us feedback using this URL, which I believe has been put in the chat. Thank you very much. We have other useful links. There's a link here to upcoming workshops. I will just look that up. Our next few workshops on the 17th of January, in a week's time, we have a workshop on learning Apache Kafka with Python. On the 24th of January, we have Data Persistence 101, which is a Java workshop using Spring Boot and MySQL. On the 31st of January, at the same time as this one, so it's APAC friendly, we have search and aggregations made easy with OpenSearch and Node.js. So that's about using OpenSearch to do all sorts of things. All of those are fascinating and fun, and I recommend them. We will have more workshops in February, but we aren't announcing those quite yet. Other useful URLs, you've already come across the forum, which is where you can talk to other Aiven users or potential Aiven users and ask questions or find information. We have our Aiven newsletter, which you're welcome to subscribe to. I myself am subscribed because it's interesting. The Developer Center has articles about useful technical things. And as we already said, there's the link to the workshop feedback. Thank you for joining us. I hope that was useful. And see you another time.
Thank you so much, Tips. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.